What is shame, really? Shame is a universal wound, not a personal flaw. It's a heavy anchor, one of the most destabilizing distortions in the field. We all experience some degree of shame because it's part of the human experience. Though often felt emotionally, shame is a spiritual wound that distorts identity, worthiness, belonging, and our relationship with the divine. Shame isn't just a feeling in the heart, it's a shadow in the soul, a distortion in the field, a fracture of identity that has traveled longer and farther than most of us can remember. Shame often leads to cycles of self-abandonment, collapse, and the dimming of our inner light. It can also lead to a shame spiral collapse and a destructive or a self-destructive impulse. When the shame wound gets triggered, we forget who we are and we default to the old distorted programming taught to us by trauma, family, religion, culture. Shame runs deep, not just as an emotional experience, but as a spiritual wound that distorts self-worth across generations. In this episode, we'll gently uncover the roots of shame, from early attachment wounds to familial and cultural conditioning and ancestral trauma that we inherit and end up carrying without realizing it's not even ours. We'll also explore the spiritual agreements we might be making with the darkness, unknowingly consenting to the unworthiness. The opening question for this topic is, what part of you have you decided is unlovable? You'll have the opportunity in this episode to learn to recognize the shame spiral patterns and their triggers, then to hold the so-called unlovable parts with more compassion so you can begin reclaiming your soul-aligned self-worth. This is a tender invitation to remember you are worthy simply because you exist, and you're allowed to reclaim your worthiness, your sense of belonging, and your healing. Most of what people think is their personality are just layers of trauma adaptation. But before you were told who you weren't, you were already whole. Shame is one of the most common anchors that weigh us down and sabotage our lives. And it's one of the saddest ones because of how much destruction it can create on the person carrying it, as well as their relationships and ability to feel connected. This is the fourth portal in this 9-part mini-series on the emotional and behavioral anchors that weigh us down in life. But before we go deeper, let's settle in here for a moment. Breathe. Let your nervous system know it's safe to be present and you don't have to be perfect. You are not broken. You are here and you are exactly where healing starts. So let's begin here with an invitation to compassion. Shame is a story passed down, not your soul's truth. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is Shame, the Echo of Unworthiness. I'm so excited to share with you that my new book is now available on Amazon and Audible. It's called Becoming Whole: How to Prevent Stockholm Syndrome and Transcend Darkness in Your Life and Relationships. This book is an essential holistic guide for understanding the shocking events that have happened in our world since 2020, where we are now, and where we can go if we don't want to follow the path of social engineering that's aiming to keep us in a state of captivity. My goal with this book is to help millions of people see the opportunity to liberate their souls from the learned helplessness caused by the ongoing psychological and spiritual warfare in our world, so they can thrive during these challenging times, restore wholeness and freedom, and create a better future for the next generations instead of passing this burden forward. Check out Becoming Whole by Meredith Miller in paperback, Kindle, or audiobook format. Let's face it, sometimes we just don't have the energy to do the inner work. That's why I want to tell you about a little device that you can use to help yourself self-regulate your nervous system with the click of a few buttons during intense moments when you just need relief so you can function or sleep. It's called the Vibe. I've been using much more complicated and expensive frequency devices for almost 20 years. I was blown away when I saw how affordable this device is and how easy it is to use. This makes frequency medicine more accessible. It puts sovereign wellness back in the hands of the people. This pocket device uses frequencies to relieve symptoms like anxiety, inflammation, neck pain, back pain, fibromyalgia, headaches, irritability, depression, brain fog, insomnia, heart issues, and more. You can use it on your dogs and cats too. It's based on technology with a 98% success rate in alleviating the symptoms of post-trauma. Your search for PEMF on PubMed will yield hundreds of scientific studies revealing its potential benefits. You'll find the link to this affordable device in the show notes. That's where you can listen to the interview I did with the rocket scientist who developed it. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. Information provided is for educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as medical advice or for preventing, diagnosing, curing, or treating any disease. Consult a qualified professional for any questions specific to your health and well-being. The origin of shame is found in childhood and ancestral echoes. Shame takes root through early life experiences and intergenerational transmission. Shame often begins in pre-verbal moments, when love or presence was withheld, absent, or inconsistent. The child internalizes abuse, abandonment, and neglect as a statement of worth. The child begins to believe, I'm unwanted, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable. That causes a devastating disconnection that fractures the psyche. The shame then repeats through self-abandonment into adulthood. It's often overlapping with themes of poverty, scarcity, lack, unworthiness, and loneliness. Shame teaches us to become architects of our own absence in the very same places where we were once abandoned. Shame survives by isolation. It dissolves in shared presence with self, the creator, and others. The emotional imprint of shame and the agreement, I'm not worthy, is a primary core wound, perhaps one of the most universal and deeply encoded distortions in the human generational field. Shame hides inside a false identity scaffolding. And that scaffolding is heavy. These patterns echo through generations, often through spiritual inherited distortions. Whose voice are you still carrying that told you you weren't enough or you were too much? These spiritual wounds often show up as self-talk, as emotional and behavioral patterns, and as persistent inner collapse. Shame hides inside our everyday choices, in the way we see ourselves and others, in our relationships with ourselves, with others, with God, with money, with belonging, and our belongings. And this story isn't just personal, though it feels very much so. Many of the stories of shame that we carry were never ours to begin with. They were echoes of ancestors, handed down through generations as survival adaptations. Shame shows up in our adaptive strategies and symptoms. Shame masks itself in behavior and identity, often in very common ways. Here are some common manifestations of shame that can appear in our identity, our behavior, and our relationships. Playing small, dimming joy, sabotaging our dreams, perfectionism, self-criticism, people-pleasing, overperforming, being useful to earn worth, a tendency toward lack, scarcity, and poverty mindset even when you do have money, sexual shame or repression, the inability to receive pleasure, or the fear of not being enough to give pleasure to another, generational rage that leads to a sense of impotence, the shame-pride pendulum, flipping back and forth between collapse and grandiosity, The fear of being found out as not good enough or too much, sometimes called the imposter syndrome. The fear of being truly seen or loved, accompanied by the dread of abandonment. Shutting the gates of the heart and pushing people away. The gravitational pull of self-pity that can collapse reality in an instant. Where do you see any of these patterns showing up in your life? Not as a judgment, simply as worn tracks in the field. The shame often sounds like identity distortions. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I'm a burden. I'm unlovable. I'm unwanted. I'm bad. Something is wrong with me. Then there are sub-programs that stack upon shame and echo in our experiences. These might sound like things like, I don't matter. My feelings don't matter. I have to fix others to be loved. I have to be useful to be loved. If I rest, I'll be forgotten. I don't deserve pleasure or abundance. I don't deserve to choose. If I speak the truth, I'll be abandoned. I'm abandoned by those I love. So take a breath. Do any of these patterns feel familiar? Not as who you are, but as something you've carried. The shame spiral, the loop of collapse. Shame doesn't just arrive as a single emotion. It unfolds in a patterned spiral. Shame is like gravity in the psyche. It pulls attention and energy downward, away from the vibrant field of connection. But when we learn to notice its gravitational pull without collapsing into it, we can unlearn that pattern and choose a new response. Here's how it usually goes. 1, a trigger. Something small happens, maybe a mistake that you or someone else makes, a rejection, a misunderstanding, a moment of being overlooked, or even a success or opportunity that feels too good. The nervous system flashes red. You're exposed. People are going to know you're unworthy. Abort mission. 2, an old identity wound activates. The inner voice says, I'm broken beyond repair. I'm a burden. I'm bad. Something is wrong with me. Nobody wants me. That's where the tripwire of the unbearable shadow replaces presence. Then the false self gets activated so you don't have to feel it. 3, self-abandonment. You disconnect from your center, beat yourself up harshly, and reach for a coping mechanism. This might look like overworking, isolating, people-pleasing, or numbing out and giving up. 4, comparison and idealization. You scroll online or ruminate internally, comparing yourself and reinforcing the ideas that others are more and you're less, or you're too much for others. You might notice that you flip back and forth between inferiority and superiority stances. This is where you'll see others' stability or success and internalize it as proof of your inadequacy. Or you'll tell yourself that you're better than the person who made a mistake, misunderstood, or rejected you. 5, collapse or compensation. You either shut down, which is collapse, then withdraw, or you swing into performance overdrive, which is compensation, to prove your worth. Both of these strategies deepen the shame loop rather than exit it. Neither strategy leads to inner healing or relational repair. 6, spiritual disconnection. Subconsciously, the shame whispers something like, even God wouldn't want me, or I'm not worthy of the Creator's love and support. This is the excruciating pain of existential loneliness caused by the perceived disconnection from the Creator. And it's often the most hidden narrative, yet the most deeply impactful. The result? Isolation, exhaustion, restlessness, disconnection from truth, a fragmented sense of self, and a disabling tidal wave of self-pity. In relationships, when you love someone struggling with shame, it's similar yet different than walking on eggshells. Relating to someone in a shame spiral can feel like approaching them on a frozen lake. You see them out there, alone, distant, unreachable. You long to meet them, and you might even feel that they really long to meet you. You want to pull them close. You want to tell them you're not alone. But the ice is thin. Each step feels risky, so you walk gingerly. And you hear the subtle cracks beneath your feet, the sound of their shame bracing for collapse. You want to meet them with warmth, but even the warmth feels like a threat when the heart is frozen, hypervigilant, and standing on thin ice. The weight of their inner scaffolding, the heaviness of the shame could break the surface at any moment. Sometimes just being seen is what collapses the ice. Where fear builds walls around the heart and defensiveness wraps the heart in barbed wire, shame causes the heart to go cold. It collapses inward in an instant into the sudden plunge of Arctic waters. Shame begins to thaw, not from force, but from warmth. Connection becomes possible again on sacred ground, not because the shame has vanished, but because it's no longer leading, no longer capable of collapsing reality. So what's the path for stepping back into the warmth? Reclaiming the spiral as a signal instead of a sentence. If you are the one struggling with shame, instead of seeing the shame spiral as failure, as justification for your brokenness, or part of who you are, you can begin to recognize it as a signal, an invitation to pause and presence. Questions that interrupt the spiral. What did I just make this mean about me? What does the younger version of me need to hear or feel right now? How old is that part of me? What can I do to meet that tender child part with acceptance, love, and connection? When you return the locus of control within, instead of waiting for someone else to rescue you from those feelings by meeting your unmet childhood needs, you start to dispel the distortions and rebuild, or perhaps build for the very first time, your ability to trust yourself. That's where genuine confidence begins. So remember, the shame spiral isn't the truth. It isn't part of your personality, and it isn't proof of your brokenness. It's simply a learned echo, a signal of a conditioned reaction. Every spiral can become a doorway back to compassion, coherence, and divine connection. The greatest spiritual distortion is our disconnection from God. The root of the shame wound is spiritual. The deepest shame often lives in the fracture of disconnection between you and your Creator. While working with people carrying a shame wound, I usually discover a genetic program that's related to the connection with God based on something that happened to an ancestor a long time ago. Those distortions shape our sense of what we can receive, create, and become. Sometimes it's inherited from religious, cultural, or family dogma. Sometimes it's related to a tragedy that happened to an ancestor that was interpreted as a punishment from God, leaving the emotional residue of guilt or self-blame in the lineage, and a distortion of shame in the identity of all the descendants. The shame wound comes with some kind of shame-based relationship with God, or a shame-based reason for why the person feels forsaken by their Creator. These are subconscious programs, and we're often not aware of them at all. In theta healing, it's recommended to do muscle testing for the programs, but through my work, I found that it's unnecessary because when the person hears the bottom belief or program spoken out loud, they usually start crying. So notice if any of these stirs an emotional resonance in you. These are some common spiritual programs around the wounding of shame. God is dead. I have to suffer to be close to God. Loving God means sacrificing myself. I'm unworthy of God's love and support. God doesn't love me. I'm abandoned by God. I have to earn God's love. Programs like these create distortions in our relationships with ourselves and other humans as well, because our relationship with ourselves and others is often a mirror of our relationship with our Creator. You don't have to prove your worth to God. Your worthiness comes from your Creator. Your existence is the proof of your worthiness. Everything else is just distortion, regret, fear, blame, shame, guilt, rejection, or resentment. And the more you clear those layers, the easier it is to remember the truth about your worthiness. Is there a part of you that feels exiled from the divine? Would you like to remember that your worth isn't something to earn? It's something to remember and reclaim. Would you like to remember that you are worthy of God's love and support? Would you like to remember that you're worthy because you exist? Would you like to remember your worth according to God's definition and perspective of your worth, free from the distortions that you were taught? Would you like to unsubscribe from outsourcing your worth to others and from needing others to co-sign on your worthiness? Would you like to remember how to forgive yourself for making mistakes and how to forgive others when they make mistakes? Would you like to remember how to liberate yourself from generational blame and self-blame loops? Would you like to know that mistakes are just choices, that they don't define you, and you can always make new choices? Would you like to remember how to truly see yourself, that it's safe to, and that you're allowed to know who you really are, free from the distortions of family, religion, culture, and society? The somatic shadows of shame, where it lives in the body. Shame often lives in the pelvis, behind the heart, and in the lower back. It triggers collapse responses even when expansion is safe. The nervous system may expect abandonment, failure, or humiliation as default. This is the nervous system's expectation of collapse. This is simply a learned response. It was taught and conditioned, and it can be unlearned. So I want to invite you to bring your breath into the pelvis, into the lumbar area, and into the mid-back or thoracic region of your spine. And ask yourself, what part of me still prepares to collapse, even when love is near? And what does that feel like in your body? These parts don't need fixing, they need presence. So can you bring your breath and awareness gently into those areas? Take a breath into that place. Notice its texture, the temperature, the sensation or feeling. What does it feel like to be present in that space? Your presence is the start of self-compassion, the path to remembering your worthiness. Your worth is the divine inheritance of your existence. Your worthiness doesn't come from the outside world. Healing shame doesn't happen through repeating affirmations and telling yourself the opposite of what the shame is telling you. It also doesn't heal through the pretty words of others. Your subconscious will usually reject all of that, even if it sounds good at the moment. Healing shame isn't about affirmation. It's about remembrance. You don't earn worthiness. You remember it. Worth is not conditional, earned, or assigned. Worth is not performance-based. Worth is not something you have to prove. Worth is the harmonic fact of your existence, as real and as present as your breath. Healing the shame begins with compassionate self-witnessing, and that happens through remembering who you are in God's eyes. Healing the shame deepens by speaking out loud the ugliest thing the shame is telling you. Whatever that is, it has something to do with an experience you had in childhood, even though it started long before you because it was inherited as a generational pattern. The next step is meeting your little boy or girl and reclaiming that version of your inner child. There may be many of these versions where these imprints took place, and some of these start all the way back in the womb. I guide people through this tender integration process layer by layer. You can find the link to work with me one-on-one in the show notes. The people who I've found suffer the most from shame are often those who are spiritual and have a deep desire to know God, yet a conflicting program that tells them they're not worthy of that. The loss of the original connection to the Creator leads to a disconnection from others and self. The disconnection from our Creator robs us from feeling a sense of inner peace. And that is when it's easiest for the dark forces to speak poison into our hearts and minds. And then we can unknowingly make agreements with the darkness. That is how the shame takes over. The shame causes restlessness and intense anxiety that comes and goes with current life experiences, depending on whether the ego feels up or down based on the story we're telling ourselves about who we are. That's why we can't heal the shame through the ego, because the ego is always up or down, and neither of those leads to healing. Restlessness usually leads to seeking peace outside oneself, often through fleeting pleasure that temporarily distracts us from the pain. That can be through substances, consumption habits, whether we're consuming content online or purchasing physical things. It causes us to seek affection, attention, sex, validation. And it creates a vicious cycle because we end up pursuing disordered desires in order to not feel the shame. The lack of self-awareness around why we do what we do can unknowingly open portals to dark energy, which further convinces us that we're unworthy. It's really important to identify the areas where you aren't as strong yet. The places where you're more insecure, because that is where the darkness will always probe. It will use campaigns of shame and pride to get you to make agreements with it. When you make spiritual agreements that you're anything less than your divine worthiness, you're outsourcing your identity to the dark forces. Those agreements sound like those programs we named earlier. I'm not good enough. I'm broken. I don't deserve love. I'm abandoned by God. I have to suffer to be close to God. Once you identify the soul agreements, then you can begin to unsubscribe. That's when you want to make new soul agreements with the Creator to replace the old ones. I usually do this in ancestral field sessions where you can discover the old agreement that was originally made by the ancestor, then held in place in the lineage, a distortion which you inherited. Next, you want to identify how the old agreement served you. In other words, what you got out of it. Was it a distortion of protection or safety or motivation or self-punishment or something else? And whether or not it's still serving you and your ancestor. If it's no longer serving you and your ancestor, then you and your ancestor can make a new agreement based on divine truth. That's when you can ask the Creator, what new soul agreements do you want to make? Maybe it's something like, I'm worthy because I exist and because God willed me to exist. My worthiness comes from God. I remember my divine belonging. I've always belonged and I always will belong because I am part of the Creator of all that is. Shame was never your flaw. It was the echo of someone else's absence. You belong, you are wanted, and you are already enough. Just the other day, I was working with a woman who identified her core wound as shame. And as we dug into the inner child connection and then the ancestral connection to that core wound of shame, she was able to make a new agreement with her ancestor, offer these new codes to her entire lineage. And the very next day, her kids started a new conversation with her. They wanted to talk about some childhood traumas that they had, some of which involved decisions that this woman had made as the mother. And the beautiful thing is that she was able to hold the space for her kids to listen to what they were sharing, to take responsibility for the decisions that she made and how it affected them. And she was able to do this without collapsing because she had already started transmuting that wound of shame into new medicine. It was less than 24 hours later that she was able to have this whole new experience with her kids, and to see the confirmation of the inner work that she's doing, of the availability of those new codes to her lineage, and the way that she is able to hold that space for her kids so that they can transmute that in their own way. And she said that her kids told her they never felt so understood and validated in their whole lives. So that was an absolutely amazing experience that she was able to offer her kids based on the work that she did within herself. She was able to show up in an entirely different way and create that opportunity for her kids to also liberate themselves from what they had inherited from the lineage. So maybe from where you're sitting right now, it feels impossible to move beyond that point where you don't collapse into the shame through hypervigilance, through anything that could happen that could trigger that old wound in you. It is possible to liberate yourself from the shame wound, and it is possible to offer those codes to your entire lineage. It just so happened that her children were the first ones to pick up on that, and each soul has their own free will, so not everyone is going to tune into the upgrades, but those who are ready to will. Shame is a primal fault line in the soul of humanity. We've carried shame wounding for probably all of human history. Every so often, it's exacerbated through some kind of collective trauma, which becomes more layers added to the generational burden passed down. Right now, in the 2020s, we're experiencing a provocation of the shame wound. This is not a punishment, and it isn't because we deserve it. It's an opportunity for us to recognize the wounding that we are already carrying so we can transmute it. The external agendas will continue to ramp up the pain of shame until we stop making those agreements with the darkness, turn inward and toward our Creator to remember who we really are. We heard about essential and non-essential workers during COVID. We were also told that some people were deemed unworthy of participating in society for not sacrificing our well-being by consenting to participate in medical experiments and humiliation rituals. The next level campaign against human worthiness is coming through the AI agenda. They're already letting us know in subtle ways. Massive layoffs of thousands or tens of thousands of jobs are just beginning. That trend will increase over the next few years as more human workers are replaced by AI. The beings without conscience, inhabited by evil entities, are already using phrases like useless eaters to describe humans. They're suggesting that video games and drugs will be the solution. But if your eyes are open, you probably also see the extermination agenda ramping up to accommodate the AI expansion. There's never been a more important time to heal the wounding of shame, so we're not misled to make agreements with the darkness that lead to the erasing of our dignity, our identity, our well-being, our worthiness, and our right to exist. Shame was never your flaw. It was an echo of absence that you mistook for truth. But beneath the echo is the voice of your soul calling you home. If this episode stirred something in you, let it be a beginning, not a judgment. Let the unraveling of shame reveal your remembrance of worth. The next episode on blame and projection will reveal that blame isn't clarity, it's a detour. It feels like relief, but it keeps us looping in the pain. We cast the pain outward when what's inside feels too raw. We forget that what we blame still holds our power. In that episode, I'll invite you to witness where blame is a placeholder for grief, betrayal, or unmet needs, so you can liberate yourself from that anchor holding you down in your life and relationships. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. If you'd like to have the opportunity to work privately with me, you'll find the link for one-on-ones in the show notes or on my website, innerintegration.com. I'd love to help you connect with these themes in your own life so you can transmute them for yourself and your own lineage, creating a positive impact in your life and the world around you. I also have an epic 3-month transformational journey called Becoming You, for those who want a guide to walk with you into your own inner alchemy of wounds into medicine, embodying your purpose and leading with light. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are, because the world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration podcast. You are not broken. You are not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.